what's up, guys? Today we're going to talk about guns. Now, you might say, well, you're just politicizing the shooting in Texas. You're just trying to get some clicks and views and likes over a tragedy. And it's just like, we have a mass shooting in this country seemingly every other day. So if you don't want people to talk about guns and politics after a mass shooting, then it will never happen. Because mass shootings happen all the fucking time. So that excuse doesn't fly with me. I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. And I don't care what is going on in the world about the subject I'm talking about. If that's what I want to talk about, then that's what we're going to talk about. I avoid talking about it for a long time for specifically this reason, and because everything I'm going to say has already been said by conservatives and libertarians 1,000,000 times to liberals, and they still don't get it. The main reason why I want to make this video is because after every single mass shooting, the liberals just cry and bemoan in hysteria and just in mass retardation that we have to have gun control to stop this. Why? Common sense gun control. You hear that phrase all on Facebook posts and on comments on blogs and forums, whatever. Common sense gun control. We have to do this. If only the politicians would listen to us, then we could stop all of these thousands of deaths every single year in America. And it's just like, no, there is no such thing as common sense gun control. Gun control is not common sense at all. It is restricting people's fundamental right to self-defense, their right to life, the most important right that everyone, regardless of race, religion, gender, sexuality, whatever, every single person has this right. And if you take away someone's ability to have a gun, then you are condemning them just to be a victim to possibly, for any type of violent crime or death or murder, the most extreme violent crime, because they can't defend themselves. And the moment you start restricting people's ability to have guns based on race, sexuality, gender, religion, whatever, then that just opens the doors of what we can do with this one group. What can we do with this other group we don't like? And then 10 years from now, some other group in power says, why don't we do it with this other group that annoys us? Or is a thorn on our side, whatever. And then you get the horrible history of defenseless people getting slaughtered by usually their own government. And you wonder why this happens, because once you set the precedent that you can take away people's ability to defend themselves, to have the most current weapon available. So in medieval times, you took away people's right to have a sword, for example. And in the 1700s, you took away their right to have like a hatchet or a musket, like when it was shifting from melee to firearms. If you open the door and say, well, this one group can't have it, well, then that just any other group can use the same logic that you already introduced into the sphere, into the political spectrum, and say, well, we're going to do it too. And every side who's fighting around the world or combating political forces in a country or civil war or whatever you can think of, they all want to do it now. And that's why most countries actually have really shitty gun laws compared to the U.S. Actually, that's one of the few reasons why I still live in this country, is because it doesn't have the best gun laws. Wait, scratch that. They're not very good laws, but they're the better than any other country's gun laws. They're like the best, even that's not very good. So that's why I stay here, because the right to life is the most important right. The right to self-defense and to defend other people like your family or people who can't defend themselves is paramount to every single other right the Constitution gives us. Like I said before, like freedom to assemble, freedom of speech, freedom to petition, whatever. Those are very important rights. Do not get me wrong. Those are fundamental human rights every person has that are very important in keeping the government in check. And you can't keep. Why can't I talk today? The government can't keep bearing down on people. Can't force people to be in a religion. Can't force people to. They can't assemble and rise up against it. But none of that matters if you can't defend yourself against the government or an armed thug or something like that. It's just like, that's nice. Your freedom of speech is really nice. Bam. Well, you're dead. Well, it doesn't fucking matter now, does it? That was more the logical argument for why there shouldn't be gun control and why people should be able to own guns. Logically, people should be able to defend themselves. Logically, people have the right to life, whatever. Now, that doesn't mean that every single person on the face of the planet should be able to own a gun. Literally, no one in the world says that. Even the most hardened NRA supporters do not say that mentally ill people, and I don't mean that they have depression or anxiety, and that doesn't count. I'm talking about people who have schizophrenia or bipolarism to so extreme that they are violent. You know, people who have mental retardation so bad that they can't function. You know, they can't hold a job. They like can't distinguish reality from their illness or what they think is happening. Whatever. No one thinks those people should own a gun. No one thinks of someone who beats their wife, who's found guilty of domestic assault or other violent crimes should be able to own a gun. No, it's like you already proved to society that you are a menace. So you gave up those rights to own a gun and to protect yourself because you fucked up. You know, no one says that. The NRA does not say the mentally ill people are people who have been guilty of assault or burglary or domestic assault or rape or murder should be able to own a gun. It's just no one says that. So those restrictions don't count. That's simply a regulation of the Second Amendment. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that you can't regulate freedoms. For example, you have freedom of speech, but the classic example, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that will result in people's, you might kill them, you might injure them, you know, it causes chaos, you know, like you don't have the right to say that. You don't have the right to call for violence because violence is bad, violence against the law. You can't call for something that's illegal. You can't call on people to go kill other people. Okay, that doesn't count in your freedom of speech. So just because the freedom of speech is regulated in those two examples I just listed doesn't mean that the freedom is infringed in any way. Same thing with Second Amendment. There's nothing wrong with background checks. There's nothing wrong with denying mentally ill people the right to own a gun. That's just simply regulating the amendment. Because even though I'm a stringent Second Amendment supporter, I don't have a problem with background checks. You know, they are so like streamlined now with technology. Man, I can't talk today, can I? You know, it's the minor inconvenience for me when I buy one. It's like, oh, it takes 20, 30 minutes, or a big fucking whoop, you know? And that's not infringing on my right because I'm not mentally ill. I haven't been convicted of assault or domestic assault or murder, whatever, you know? So there are some hardliner NRA supporters who believe that background checks and keeping guns from literally anyone is breaking the amendment. Like any regulations infringement, like no, you don't apply the logic to any of the other amendments or any other rights that we have. So you can't apply to this one, okay? Like this double standards. You can't have double standards when you're trying to figure out logically how you should do things. Liberals will also counter with, okay, so maybe you have the right to self-defense. Okay, whatever. But the likelihood of you getting shot by your own gun by an accident, or someone stealing it and killing you with it, or the chance of an accident with it, or the chance of being misused is much higher than it actually being used in the case of self-defense. Well, that's an outright lie, because you can just look at the stats and see that guns are used in defensive situations. Let's just come up with the exact stat, because I think it's like 2.4, 2.6 million, but I don't want to be accused of making up shit. So, number of defensive gun uses in America every year. This is just in America. It doesn't count worldwide. Yeah, 2.5 million times a year a gun is used in a defensive situation in the U.S. alone. Now, that may simply be, most of the time actually, it's just the person, like a burglar invaded the home, is going to rob them, going to beat them up, whatever, simply showing the gun, simply drawing it on them, or, you know, cocking it, makes them flee. That counts as a defensive use. That counts as potentially saving your life, because you have no idea what that person is going to do to you. You may have potentially just saved your life and everyone else in the house. You don't know. It counts as a defensive situation. And that's why the stat is 2.5 million times every fucking year. That is a mind-blowing amount of times that guns have been used for good in this country alone. The liberal media will never, ever, ever talk about that. They will never mention any of these stories. Why? Because it contradicts their narrative. When a mass shooting happens, when a gun is misused in a crime for murder, they will plaster it on their stupid little screens and no one ever watches anymore. That's why CNN ratings and the mainstream media ratings in general downhill, because no one watches TV anymore. That's beside the point. And they will plaster it, and they'll be on the news for days and days and days and days. Meanwhile, literally hundreds of defensive gun uses will occur around the country during that time frame, and they won't say a word about it. Even the shooting in the church near San Antonio in Texas. A neighbor heard the shooting, got his AR-15, and went and shot the guy twice, and that's why he fled. He potentially saved lives because the guy would have continued his slaughter if not for the neighbor, the guy with the gun, to go shoot him. When are you going to hear about it in the mainstream media? They are never going to mention that. When you read the article, they just say, oh yeah, he was shooting people and then he killed himself at the end, which technically is true. They're not lying when they say that. They just leave out the fact that between him shooting and him killing himself, oh, a neighbor shot him 2 times, that's why he fled in his car, and the neighbor, another person, pursued him in their vehicle for a while until he stopped for whatever reason and then shot and killed himself. So technically them saying that he was shooting people and then he committed suicide, like lots of mass shootings end that way, they shoot themselves before the police can get to them, technically that's not lying. They're lying by omission, by not stating, oh, the good guy with the gun. The thing that they say hardly ever happens, or happens less frequently than mass shootings or, you know, murders with guns in general. But again, a simple Google search will put that claim to rest. 2.5 million times every single year in this country. Let us even count the whole world. You know, we're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of times across the chaotic world with civil wars and corruption, and the government doesn't have control of a lot of territory, like in Africa, the Middle East, whatever. You know, all of these stories, these untold stories of people using guns to defend themselves, and then people say that they're only used for evil. Like, what the fuck are you fucking smoking? Problem is that liberals base their policy on feelings. They feel better if they would ban all guns. They feel better if all this violence just go away. They just ban the instruments of violence, and then everything will be happy, magical, and rainbows. They're scared of guns because they don't understand them, and they only see them used for evil because they watch CNN and they don't listen to the stories of defensive gun uses. You know, all based on feelings. The problem, like, you have the right to base your policies on whatever. There's nothing saying you can't do that. Nothing saying you can't base your personal opinions on stances on issues based on feelings. But the problem with that is that that leads to irrational and illogical conclusions, because you're not basing it on rational logic, you're basing it on your feelings. So that's how you get situations of, like in Europe when they ban guns, and then people can't defend themselves against criminals who have guns in the black market, you know, and then they're just slaughtered. They can't defend themselves, they can't defend their families. Or criminals, guns are hard to get, so they go to knives, and then knife attacks are up, you know, 5 times in England, for example, whatever. It's like, this is what happens when you base your policy on feelings. You have unintended consequences because you didn't think it out rationally and logically. And this is the problem. This is why I base my opinion based on logic and stats. The logic that everyone has the right to self-defense. Everyone should have pretty much the same type of weaponry that the criminals, the burglars, the robbers, the rapists, the murderers in their town, in their country, whatever, have. So when a criminal has a pistol or a rifle or a shotgun, that's what I want to have too. I know tactically this doesn't make sense to liberals, it just goes way over their heads, but if a criminal has like an assault rifle that has a 30-round mag, and now I have a bolt-action rifle with 5 rounds, it is really, really hard for me to win that fight. Especially in a close-quarter situation. It's possible, don't get me wrong, it's not impossible. It's just be a lot easier if I had the same type of gun with the same amount of mags. Same amount of mags, same amount of bullets. You know, and then when you're caught off guard by a burglary or a home invasion or a murder, you want every advantage you can get because you're caught off guard. You're scared out of your fucking mind. The criminal is sort of scared because he doesn't know what you have, but he planned this. He's on the offensive. You are caught off guard in the defensive, and you want every single advantage you can get. I want the best gun I can get to defend myself and my family, or whatever situation. You know, I don't want to be limited, but, oh, you can't have guns, so you got to fight them off with a taser and a knife. Yeah, good luck with that. Or sometimes, in some countries, you know, you can have a bolt-action rifle with 5 rounds, or a shotgun with like 5 rounds, or a pistol with like, I don't know, sometimes you can't even own pistols. You know what I mean, okay? So it's really fucking hard. So there, in a nutshell, is my rant on guns, and why every single time these mass shootings happen and liberals call for common sense gun control, that is absolutely not the answer whatsoever. The answer, unfortunately, is with culture. It's with our sick culture that many people have in this country, and unfortunately, culture takes a long time to change in a person. These people who, I mean, how to, like, summarize this? You know, I'm going on like 13, 14 minutes here. how to summarize this, these people have no regard for human life whatsoever. There are thousands of people across the country who have no regard for anyone but themselves, and then they get pissed off about something, they just go and just fucking murder people. The culture that we have inadvertently created, like a byproduct of our American culture, is that people don't value human life. That's why it happens way often here than it does in other parts. That's why, like in ISIS-controlled territories, for example, they have no problem beheading people for doing nothing wrong or raping a woman because she was raped, you know, and they think that's just whatever because they have no regard for human dignity, for human rights, and for human life. That's why it happens there. That's why it doesn't happen here. Likewise, that is why we have all of these mass shootings and all of this violence in this country, because the culture we have created is that people don't have no regard for human life. People do not act out of compassion. Now, this is just generalization. I'm not saying every single American is a fucking asshole, although a lot of them are. But I'm saying, like, in a given year, let's say, just say, I'm just throwing out numbers here, 5,000 people will commit violence with a gun or mass shootings in a given year, whatever. These 5,000 people already had that mindset throughout their childhood and their adulthood, whatever, and then they happen to snap. They happen to launch their attack in 2017, for example. You know, the culture created all these problems. In 2018, another 5,000 people are going to launch their attack, or they're going to snap, or something's going to happen and they're going to use a gun in a crime and a murder. This is how the culture festers and rots and continues to pump out these people who have no regard for human life, who are complete thugs, complete fucking assholes, who don't give a fuck about anyone but themselves. That's what we need to change. That takes a very long time to do, and sometimes for some people it's impossible. Sometimes you can't change an asshole. He's gonna be an asshole. That's it. You know, you can't change him. Lots of mass shootings happen in gun-free zones, zones where people who obey the law can't own guns. And a potential mass shooter knows, hey, odds are those people aren't going to be armed. There might be one person who's breaking the law and carrying a gun illegally, but odds are they're not going to have a gun. So that is a soft target. That's why they go after churches. That's why they go after city squares in New York where you can't conceal carry. Whatever. That's why they do this. We need to limit the amount of gun-free zones to, I've said this before, almost everything except like the Senate building itself in D.C. and then like religious buildings. And you say, well, that wouldn't fix the church shootings. Like, yeah, I know, but you know, I'm not really religious, but I can see why a religious person or the person in charge of a mosque or a church would not want their people going there carrying weapons. You know, it's just sacrilegious. It's just not. It's offensive. It's supposed to be a place of worship. So I could see where that gets kind of murky as far as the rules that I'm proposing. Because in general, yeah, there should be no gun-free zones anywhere. Everyone should be able to carry a gun to protect themselves pretty much anywhere, except for a very few exceptions. And those exceptions are kind of hard to lay out because it's like, you know what, yeah, I know the person's right to defend themselves. We can't have someone packing heat in the Senate building. That's too fucking dangerous. Or a person carrying a gun in a church, that's just wrong. That's sacrilegious. And it's just not going to go well with other people in church. So I'll leave a link to Armed Citizen Stories that the NRA compiles. This is just a fraction of the defensive gun uses that happen every single year. But this just highlights some of the stories that you can read. That, again, they link to like local news stories. Like local news agencies and local newspapers will report on these defensive gun uses because they're not really political. They just report on the local news and that's about it. They're less political than like Washington Post, CNN, who report nationally. You will never see any of these stories on CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, MSN. Never. Just flat out never. You can just look. It's like seemingly every other day or every single week a defensive gun use is used. And these are just the ones that the NRA just happen to compile in this one website and on this one web page. There are 2.5 million. Let's just calculate how many times is that. So 2.5 million defensive gun uses divided by 365 days in a year. Every single day, A gun is used offensively 6,849 times in this country alone. That is just mind-boggling that happens so often. And yet, when you hear about it in mainstream media, literally never. Maybe 1% of the time, if that. Here's think about that. Just in your daily life, the 24 hours have passed, a gun has potentially saved a person's life 6,849 times. That's just mind-boggling. First, that shows how sad our society is, that we're under attack so much that happens 6,849 times a day. It also speaks to how guns can be used for good, for saving lives, for stopping crime, for protecting children, for protecting old people who can't defend themselves, for protecting someone's home. And it's just guns are simply weapons. They can be used for good or bad. It depends about the person who is wielding it. So there's my whole rant on guns. I think I said it like 5 minutes ago, and I said it in conclusion, and I kept on going, so there's so many topics to cover in this one topic in order for it to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, to cover all my bases, because someone's going to say, oh, you didn't mention that, or you didn't mention this. It's like, yeah, I did. I took like 20 minutes to cover everything on why I think that gun-free zones are stupid, how common sense gun control, it doesn't exist and we shouldn't enact that. Then we need to change the culture. We need to get rid of gun-free zones, whatever. These are the things I'm proposing based on logic and stats instead of feelings.